It's Wellness Wednesday. This Wellness Wednesday, I am taking a question from my Discord server, and I'm doing this knowing that it could set off some people who think things that I say are about them that aren't about them. But I do think it is a good topic, and it's a difficult question because it's so broad. And so I'm going to try to respond in the spirit that it is given. The whole thing is vague, and there's going to be a lot of it depends in it. But I mean, Wellness Wednesday is always just a starting point, right? So we do this in the spirit of benefit of doubt and assuming good intentions, right? So it is the beginning of the month. So help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it at coffee.com/Leanna K. So the first thing, I'm going to set real clear, statements that if you do not really internalize all of these, then there's the likelihood of good outcomes lowers. Now, you are not solely responsible for good outcomes. This is a friendship. You are not the person's therapist. You are not the person's parent. You are not the person's keeper. You are not the person's jailer. You are not the person's mental health nurse. You are their friend. And if you feel like you have some duty of care over another adult, that can lead to problems in the relationship, because not only do you start feeling stuck and therefore resenting the other person, you can risk codependency, and you can risk losing yourself in the whole thing. So that's very important. There's going to be a lot of talk of boundaries in this. But that is really, really important. What friendship means. Friendship means you matter and the other person matters. And if the person's mental health condition is this massive thing that nothing else can get through it, I hear from a lot of clients who are, working on various issues, that one of their biggest fears is that they're just a burden to their friends. So keep that in mind when you think about this stuff. The way I kind of set it is own your choices. You are choosing to stay in this friendship. You can choose to end it. And that thought is terrifying for people with certain mental health conditions. But think about it. If it's not a choice, it's not a friendship. It's some sort of obligation. And that is not going to work. We talk a lot in nerd circles about rejection and how bad rejection is. But the reality is, without the possibility of rejection, you can never feel accepted. And if you're just biting your tongue and keeping everything in because you're afraid of being ostracized, you can talk to 100 people in a day and really not feel like you have a place in this world. So you got to look, first and foremost, you're responsible for you. They're responsible for them. You did not cause their mental health condition. You cannot save them from it. You are not responsible for their mental health. You are responsible for your own behavior. And that means if you are feeling really depleted, you are not being a bad friend for stepping back or taking a break or setting boundaries. Now, the problem with really mentally ill people, no, the problem with friendships with really mentally ill people, the people themselves aren't the problem. But by the time you realize how enmeshed everything is, extracting yourself back to healthy boundaries can seem horrible to the mentally ill person. And while their feelings are valid, you matter too. And unfortunately, in situations like that, it can become a zero-sum game where you can't get your own sense of equilibrium without getting pretty major distance from the person temporarily, sometimes permanently. And again, it really, really depends on the nature of the condition, the severity of the condition, and how much work the person's putting into their recovery. For me, and this is just for me, therapy is mandatory for somebody who is, who is symptomatic. It is the original question was, especially when they're getting better, how do you talk to people who are friends who are mentally ill? And the biggest mistake people make with therapy is the minute they start feeling better, they stop. And that can work, that 6 to 8 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy. That for simple stuff, like a specific problem, yeah, that's sufficient. But for major stuff, stuff like dialectical behavior therapy, it's years. I mean, that's what was so funny about that line in She-Hulk, and in 5 to 7 years or something like that. She's like, nope. Yeah, that's a really depressing part of that. Is there gradual improvement? Sure, absolutely. But to really be in a place where you're solid, I mean, things slip, you get back, things slip, you get back. But yeah, it does take years. And there's this shitty thing that I've heard some therapists doing. I say it's shitty because it's lying to the client, but they say someone has graduated from some sort of therapeutic process as a way of dropping the client without fireworks or without them feeling rejected. And I get why they do it, but lying to somebody who is struggling, I seriously believe in my heart of hearts, part of them knows. It contributes to their destabilization. If they don't know and they find out later that you've been keeping important things from them or lying to them, they are understandably profoundly hurt and embarrassed. But also, the idea of graduating therapy, it's not school. It's an ongoing process. It's ongoing habits. When you graduate from high school, you don't have to study chemistry anymore, unless you're going into chemistry, right? But mental health, it's a lifelong thing. You don't just stop. It's this shorthand that therapists use to be rid, usually of clients who miss a lot of sessions, in my experience, but some who are disruptive to groups and whatnot, instead of being honest with them and, asking them to leave and telling them honestly why. We can't control that, right? But it's tough to reset boundaries if you're already enmeshed. And by enmeshed, it means it's not a healthy give and take. It is this push-pull codependency where the person is so overly reliant on you that you feel like you're drowning. And, you end up not being your best self. You end up not treating the person terribly well sometimes just because you're so overextended. And one of the things that you really got to watch is the time boundaries. The number of people I hear who are on calls with someone for 4 and 5 hours because, they're depressed and, they want to be supportive. That's not healthy support. That person doesn't have the skills to, the requisite skills in life. And again, you're not their therapist, you're not their keeper, you're not their parent, you're not their jailer, you're not their mental health nurse, you're their friend. And yeah, sitting around shooting the shit for a long time sometimes is one thing, but this is a constant thing for some people. That's not healthy. If you can't start a conversation and say, look, I got 20 minutes, or look, I got an hour, and they respect that, so I prefer to say I have this much time at the beginning of something. And when I was at my worst, any pleasant moment was such a lifeline. I didn't want to let go. It hurt to end those conversations, but it was really important for me to learn to do it, and really important to give it a chance. That, just because that person needs to go now doesn't mean they're going to be gone forever. They're never going to want to speak to you, right? You got to learn to regulate that way. And you're not helping a person learn that if you're giving in when you say, I've got an hour, and they take 5. That's not helping anybody. And it can be tough to, break that off when the person is really bad and pleading. But again, you didn't cause their mental health issues. You can't cure them, and you can't save them from it. The only person who can save them from it is themselves. You got to think about yourself as like Samwise Gamgee. You can't carry the ring for Mr. Frodo. You can carry them, right? And like, that was just a short jaunt, right? You cannot take their pain away, no matter how much you want to. It's just not. Really profound stuff comes from early childhood. It really predates you. And if you assume responsibility for that stuff that isn't you, when you assume responsibility for another person's thing, you also assume blame for another person's thing. And someone who is not emotionally regulated, that means they're going to start blaming you. And that's when things go really, really awry. It is okay, and I recommend not just setting time boundaries, but also, they call them internal boundaries or communication boundaries or intellectual boundaries. But what it basically means is you're happy to hear about their feelings, no matter how difficult they are. You will not accept being blamed for things you didn't do, or generalized statements like nobody cares. Or when you've sat there for 90 minutes, you care. Anybody who sits there with somebody, even somebody who sits there for 20 minutes cares. But if somebody's taken up 20 hours of a person's time that month and they're going, no one cares, well, that's disordered thinking. It doesn't make any sense. People who don't care don't sit there that long. That's the kind of stuff that does need to get challenged. But getting into a fight with the person because the thinking is disordered, it just tends to become unpleasant, right? So it's better to just go, look, I'm telling you, like, when things are calm, I want to hear how you're feeling. I'm not going to accept blame for things I didn't do. I can't, it is too hard for me to sit here and hear nobody cares, because I do. And, I don't want to get angry at you. So, these certain tripwires on conversations, if they happen, I'm gonna, I'm gonna warn you once. If it happens again, I'm gonna end the conversation. I'm gonna talk to you tomorrow, next Wednesday, whatever. They're not gonna like it, but you have to do it because, again, you're not their therapist, you're not their keeper, you're not their jailer, you're not their mental health nurse, you're not their parent. And decent therapists do set these limits too. Good parents set these boundaries on conversations. Part of the reason that people are this bad is their parents didn't set any boundaries with them. I'm shocked at the way I see some people, some adults, talk to their parents. It's just mind-blowing how constantly just abusive they are. And it's not good as a parent to take that, not just for your own self-respect, but what you're teaching your child, and it's easier to just keep it going like, yeah, okay, I gotta go, talk to you later, bye, instead of getting into a fight. Because sometimes, especially with depression, someone would rather feel angry than depressed. It just feels like more of a lift. It's energizing instead of just feeling blah. And so sometimes, without realizing it, they will pick fights just to feel something other than misery. And that's not fair to you. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. Good people can do bad things. But, you gotta set these boundaries. It's okay to set boundaries on topics. If someone is obsessing over something and you don't think it's healthy, you can say, I will talk to you about anything else right now. I do not want to talk about that. And, you might get, you're not supporting me and all that stuff. Every expert in really severe mental illnesses I have spoken to, especially experts on personality disorders, say the same thing. Certain conditions mean that, the people afflicted by them will play up every little mistake you make, every little weak moment you have, every little thing you said that was less than totally angelic. And they will grind it in because they're trying to lift themselves, the theory goes, not reading anybody's mind, via social comparison and sort of a you're not better than me kind of strategy. And every single one has said you have to set boundaries on that. Easier said than done. A lot of the time, the only real boundary enforcement we can do, if stop doing that, please, doesn't work, is to walk away temporarily. And you're like, oh, but they'll blow up or they'll do this or all that stuff. Yeah. Your behavior is on you. Their behavior is on them. And I know I learned too late that my intentions were good, but sitting there and letting people push you past your breaking point is not better than going, I'm ending this conversation right now. I'll talk to you in a week. Or, if you don't know how long you're going to be because you need a prolonged break, it is better to say that before the shit hits the fan. And that's something personally is really hard for me because I hate the word, I'm an empath. Everybody has some degree of empathy. But I am so aware of other people's emotions that I don't like saying things that upset someone in the moment. But I've recognized that it's better to upset them less with something they don't want to hear like that than to let them needle and push until they hit a PTSD trigger and I snap. Because people want a lot of understanding. A lot of people are less good at giving that. And everybody's got something. Everybody has sensitivities. And again, for it to be a friendship, it's got to be a two-way street. So if somebody hits a button on you and you do snap at them, if you do lose it on somebody with a diagnosis or not, take responsibility for that, not blame. So the difference is, oh, I did a bad thing. Oh my God, I'm such a bad friend. That doesn't do you any good, right? I don't want to do that again. So the next time they go for my jugular that way, because they know it bothers me, and for whatever reason their condition is talking them into doing it, conversation ends right there. And, there are times where you set a boundary, they push, so you step back. You set a boundary, they push, so you step back. You set a boundary, they push, so you step back, and you're out the door. And the friendship ends. Again, that option has got to be there for you to not feel trapped. Because if you feel trapped, you're going to have less distress tolerance and you are going to be more on your guard. And I've been stuck in those situations far more times than is comfortable realizing. And, I finally learned very recently that it's not noble to eat a ton of shit because you're trying to be a good friend. That's not being a good friend. That's being an enabler. And it's tough because, if you get too far in with someone like that, and really compassionate people are, they do. They want to give people a chance. And then suddenly there's enmeshment and like, oh God, what do I do? I'm going to be the bad guy here no matter what. Trust me that they may be able to smear you in the short term, but long term, the truth tends to come out. And it's better to get out sooner when they have less to splash around than, than later when they have a ton of shit that they start threatening to dump. And again, these are really severe conditions, right? We're not talking run-of-the-mill anxiety and depression. We're talking about major psychiatric disorders. And you can think someone's a good person and or just not a bad person and still think they have a condition that causes them to do utterly terrible things sometimes. These two things are not, mutually exclusive. And the minute you start feeling like you have to give up your life or you have to lose the things you care about, that, your very reputation is starting to be on the line because you have this friend that just can't stop. You start feeling really worn down. And, it's easy to say, watch the language and say things like this conversation or this argument is exhausting me, as opposed to you're exhausting. Sometimes you slip. It's better to keep it to, the activities instead of the person. But I mean, God, the sheer number of friendships that have been strained or ruined over that damn war in Gaza, to the point that I have just had to say, I am not talking about this anymore. Because people just, that thing's so raw for so many people that, I'm somebody like, I see good points here. I see good points over here. I think, all the major camps have some truth to them. That is the best way to have everybody mad at you on that issue that I can possibly freaking think of. And it's just not, I don't have enough influence over what happens in the Middle East to blow up otherwise perfectly fine relationships over it, but I can't make that choice for another person. So certain relationships have been strained just because I've had to say, look, I'm not talking about this. I know people on all sides of this issue, And I see points in all camps. So I'm out, because nobody terribly cares what I think other than to yell at me. And all the people involved are more important to me than the issue. It doesn't mean I don't think the issue is important, just the people are more important. And you know what? That's a good test. That is a hill I will die on. Because if I'm saying to a person, you are more important to me than this issue, and the other person doesn't match that energy, if they decide, no, this issue is going to be more important than the friendship, maybe the friendship's not what I thought it was. That's a way better reason to step back than a stupid fight over stupid politics that none of us can really do anything about as individuals. And, you know, people don't like that. People don't like to hear that. But to me, it's true. The other big thing that is really important, and these have all been freaking caveats, the don't do as opposed to what to do. No, I have had some to do. Okay, but in my like artist consulting and that kind of stuff, and then, you know, the coaching stuff, people don't like peer counseling. I don't know why. It's more accurate than what I do. And ironically, I started saying peer counseling because life coach sounds too, whoa, right? Life coaches charge $5,000 a month. I don't, but people get offended and they're stalking my content. So, but anyway, in the work I do, everybody signs an agreement form. Like they agree to the terms of the form. And one of the things I say is I will do best efforts for confidentiality. I can't guarantee it, because that was something I learned from suicide prevention with first responders. You never keep suicidal ideation a secret. You don't ideally keep self-destruction a secret. You don't keep something that is pushing someone towards an early grave a secret. If there's someone you can tell to get that person help. And, you know, I won't work with people with any suicidal ideations unless they have some sort of professional intervention that can put them on a 72-hour hold. It's not safe. If someone is talking about harming themselves, never, ever, ever, ever agree to keep it a secret. This is from people who lost loved ones because of this code of silence. In my instance, it was male coded spaces, that it was, you know, the bro code. And so nobody said anything, and they didn't think the guy was really serious. And then he took his own life, and they're living with guilt, you know, forever because of that. Always take it seriously. And that means sometimes asking, like, are you seriously thinking about killing yourself right now? And a lot of time people will say, not really, it was just to cope. But sometimes if you get that sort of hesitation, the feeling's okay, a lot of the times it is just trying to control what seems like an uncontrollable existence. But that may be the moment when you encourage them to call a crisis line. Because the nice thing crisis lines do, strangely, the people that run those crisis lines are not always the nicest. They can be kind of rude because they're volunteers, and so the quality standards are, I think crisis line workers should be paid personally, but I don't run the world. But they can give you information on free or low cost resources in your area that are often drop-in. That's the reason to call them. Also, just if you're feeling that awful in the middle of the night, they do have some training, even though they're volunteers, they're quite frankly better to call than a layperson who I keep hearing from people on this question. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. And what these, survivors of first responders who died by suicide said, that there's really no wrong thing to say other than trying to sweep it under the rug or telling them, you're overreacting, it's not that big a deal, all that stuff when they're in crisis like that. And sometimes you don't know they're in crisis, and okay, fair. I have tried to take you're exaggerating or you're blowing it out of proportion, you're making too big a deal out of this, out of my vocabulary. I have replaced it with, this is a strong response, what's going on, or something like that. It's hard. Everybody slips. And from a professional standpoint, overreaction is, it's a tactical discussion, but, those are strategy sessions, not crisis points. And it may seem like you're betraying a friend by telling people about that stuff. And they might be mad. I've had people utterly furious at me for saying something about this, for telling somebody, for reaching out and, hey, they're not listening to me and this is what they're talking about. Maybe you can help. They've said they're never going to speak to me again. It was a horrible betrayal, but they're still around. And so I stand by that. And again, this is not my opinion. This is proven best practices you get when you train about this stuff. And other than that, what can you do? Listen more than you talk. It's really hard to not accidentally confirm certain things that aren't true, because people, when they have disordered thinking, can believe things that just aren't true. Oh, that person did it deliberately. Usually not. Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes there are terrible people out there that do it deliberately, but they usually don't. It was just thoughtless, or there's a piece of information they didn't have. And, sometimes you can't talk the person out of believing it, but I have found it is much better to give benefit of the doubt and, be proven wrong than to assume deliberate ill intent and be proven wrong. Because, if you're wrong there, then you have to deal with the fact that the person knows you just assume shitty shit about them. Do you want to be treated that way? No, then don't treat other people that way. Right? And that is unfortunately something that diseases like depression and anxiety do. They take you to catastrophizing. Everybody hates me. If they knew me, they'd reject me. All that stuff. Guess what? Some people hate me. So, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. Some of them stink. It's not the end of the world, right? Similarly, some people do abandon me. And, that's my work to do, not getting too reliant on a small number of people. Unfortunately, sometimes it can't be helped when you're trying to push a project through with very little money and they screw you over and they let you down. That is not a moral failing. That is experience. That is learning. And you know what it does? It makes you a better person if you handle it properly. And it makes you more respectful of people who are trying to do indie projects for little or no money. you know how hard it is. And it also makes you acutely aware of people who grind in other people's failures. As one person who likes to continue sending me emails, you just fail and everyone's abandoning you and you're old and you're fat and you're ugly and like all this stuff. And the fail. It's like, that is a glimpse into that person's self-talk. When someone is casting nastiness at you, I tend to assume that's the way they talk to themselves. Probably daily. That's pretty horrifying and tragic. And you don't have to be around that. You know, I have to eat shit because, you know, I've got public contact forms that people abuse. But, you know, it was worse when you've got contact information as a journalist. Like, holy shit, the worst possible innovation in things is when we lost our desk phones as reporters and had to put our cell phone as a contact information. Fuck. You get no peace. I gave a client my cell phone number twice. The first person I did it to. Oh my God, what a mistake. What a mistake. But anyway, listening and validating feelings, you know, they may run wild with it and they say, this person did this and this person did this and this person did this. And you'll say, well, that sounds very difficult. And then they'll go to that person and say, see, Leanna said you were difficult. Or Leanna says, I was right to be upset. It's like, no, I didn't. I just validated your feelings, but that's unavoidable. If people are going to be high conflict, that's a sign. Maybe step back, you know? It's a very difficult thing when you have a lot of rejection in your past to think this person isn't worth my time. Because you're empathizing with being that person who wasn't worth other people's time. And you have to accept that, you know, I'm not worth talking to some people. And if you don't have a healthy sense of self and a healthy sense of self-worth, that can be crushing, as opposed to, well, they're wrong, but they're entitled to their opinion, their loss, right? And that's, again, that choice. You're choosing to be friends. If you come into this thing with this mindset of, I have to keep every friendship I have, you're not going to be a great friend because it's coming from a place of desperation. And, you know, listening and validating feelings is never going to get you into trouble. Sometimes they will push to get you to validate an opinion. And that's where things can go off the rails, because sometimes you can't. Sometimes you don't agree. And that's, again, why I'm a big believer in insisting that if somebody has really profound mental health challenges, that they are in formal therapy. Now, sometimes they can't afford it. I've heard a ton of sob stories from people, though, who insist that the right kind of therapy for them isn't covered by government health care. Do some research into that stuff. Sometimes it's not true. And then, you know, once somebody starts continually saying things that just aren't true, you do have to reassess. If somebody's not in a position to look at something and not approach it with false certainty, you got to protect yourself. You do. As somebody who did not protect myself enough in the past and ended up the villain of someone else's story, when you start seeing really overt delusions, especially if they're targeted at you, you have the right to protect yourself against false claims. And trust me, somebody in the throes of mental illness can look right at something and see something that's not there. And it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means that if you get too enmeshed, you will be the bad guy because you're a repository for the other person's horrible pain. It's just an offload. And hey, in some ways, you're being good to them that way. But the minute you start enabling, you're not being a good friend anymore. And friendships are boundaries, because boundaries are for both people. Boundaries mean one friend doesn't feel like a burden. The other friend doesn't feel completely exhausted, right? Both people feel like they can take up space and matter because there's a clear, this is where I end, and the importance of my framing, my feelings, my needs ends, and the other person and their framing and their feelings and their needs begins. And people think they understand that, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't realize that what they're saying is emotionally abusive. A lot of people don't realize that what they're saying is opinion and not fact. And a lot of people have learned really manipulative behaviors by an abusive or addict parent that they see as normal, and so they don't see what they do. They don't see the choices they limit in other people. And that's why I say, always recognize the friendship is a choice. And you can choose to end the friendship for any reason or no reason. And people don't have to like that, but they do have to respect it. It is just fact. And if they can't get over it, that's their work to do. You don't owe anybody anything. If you want to give them something, and that doesn't mean, somebody who hasn't been there, who's been there for you a long time, oh, just give them nothing, be selfish. No, but again, right? If friendships are not reciprocal, then people are going to leave them. And it's weird to me how some of the people who, go on about rational selfishness again and again and again, they don't understand why they are high conflict and really nasty and kind of a bully, and people don't want to be around them because they are practicing rational selfishness. It's so strange how I see, the Fedora Society type things. You see people quote this crap and they don't live it. It's not baffling to me anymore, because I realize that a lot of this stuff, it really sounds good, but it's much harder to be on the receiving end of. And the way I found, again, to wrap up, because it's getting long, the way I found was best to handle it is this friendship is a choice. I am not this person's keeper. Their mental illness is not my responsibility. Their feelings are not my feelings. I have my feelings. They have theirs. I do not have to feel their feelings for them, and I can't. And, they can think I'm the shittiest person on the planet. Doesn't make it true. I get to decide the things I think I need to work on. There are consequences for disagreeing with somebody. If your boss says, hey, do this, and you ignore it, well, there will likely be workplace discipline. It's funny how people don't realize that either. But there's consequences for not living in reality. There's consequences for exaggerating and catastrophizing. None of this makes somebody a bad person. Just make sure that as a friend, you are not enabling and encouraging that catastrophizing and, exaggerating. And if you can gently pull it back to like, okay, you don't know that, right? I understand why you think that, and I understand why you're hurt. Or they'll go, I'm not hurt. Okay, what are you? I'm upset. That's the one that get upset can be a bunch of different things. Okay, what does upset mean? Can you tell me more about this upset? Now you've gotten them away from the accusations and into their own feelings, and that you can understand and that you can validate, because feelings are always valid. Accusations, not so much. Never, ever, ever validate a false accusation. It does not help anybody, whether they have a diagnosis or not. Validate feelings. Say, I see where you got that. there is another option, and like, let's just keep that option open. Let's stick to what we know, not what we think or what we're afraid of. That's the best way, especially with anxiety or the depression anxiety cycle. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching and be well.